Global Conservation Corps presents the RHINO Man podcast. I'm John Jerko, your host, and one of the directors of RHINO Man the movie. This podcast series is a way for me to interview top conservationists on the topics of rhinos, the poaching crisis, the importance of rangers, and community engagement, all as a way to create awareness around these issues and to promote the coming release of our documentary film. In this episode, I'm talking with Peter Eastwood. Peter is a retired entrepreneur from New Zealand working in conservation in Africa. He was the founder of I Make Your Difference Trust, which has raised funds for and supported many projects across Africa working to put an end to rhino poaching. He's also the founder of Tanglewood Foundation, which supports educational films and documentaries, including the film STROOP, and programs like school camps, the Albany Thicket Biodiversity Restoration Project, Coexistence Gardens, and Koru Camp, an immersive overnight camping experience for South African communities. He strives to live a principled life with purpose, and he's a plant-based eater for the planet, animals, and better personal health. In this conversation, we talk about Peter's first trip to Africa and his path into conservation. We dive into his desire to make a difference and the learning journey he went on along the way. From focusing on frontline and anti-poaching work to shifting toward projects that engage the youth and local communities. We even spend time discussing the process of bringing a documentary film to life. My favorite part of this conversation was our discussion around Koru Camp and the impact overnighting in the bush for the first time has on young children and old grandmothers. Peter exudes passion and a boundless drive to make a difference. Finally, please don't forget to subscribe to and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform, and to share it on social media and with your friends. With your support, the RHINO Man podcast can continue to grow. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Peter Eastwood. All right, Peter, welcome to the RHINO Man podcast. It's an honor to have you on here, and I'm super excited to dive into so many topics with you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I've heard a few of your other episodes and in very esteemed company with some of the people you've had on here and some personal friends that have been on as well. So I've only just been catching up rapidly on a few of them over the last couple of weeks. So it's been great to listen to the stories that you've told.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've just been very lucky and fortunate to get to connect with some of these amazing people. And yeah, you've been doing so much work for a while now in South Africa and all over the world. I feel like, there's a lot of different places we can jump in, but maybe just give, the best you can, kind of a high level brief, like what are some of the main projects that you're currently working on? And then we'll dive back into those a little bit later on.
I think 2 years ago, I decided that there was too much going on and being spread too thin, and wanted to make, as I'd fully retired, I wanted to make some serious impact. So we worked, concentrating now pretty much just on two projects. One would be the regeneration project in the Eastern Cape, and that's where we're working on. The big plan there is to connect Great Fish River Reserve in the Eastern Cape. So, and then the other project we're working on is Koru Camp, where we created a space for community education within the Greater Kruger National Park. And I'd just throw in there this morning, I got a video through from the group that just arrived yesterday. They were at the dam 200 meters from our camp, watching a herd of elephants, and 8 wild dog ran in. It's the first time we've seen wild dog on our property, so it's such a special occasion for the kids. So I know it's not high level, but that's kind of why we do it, those special moments where the education program has been a big passion of mine for many years, so it's lovely to bring that one to fruition. That's kind of the one I'm spending most of my hours on.
Absolutely. And I really want to dive into Koru Camp. And I recently talked to Leda from the Black Mambas, and I believe they're involved a bit there. And I'm pretty sure she said it was like a pretty amazing experience. So there's a lot to talk about there. And, maybe what we could do is we could, start from the start a little bit, because I want to get your journey through this and your process and how you grew over time in this conservation space and got involved before we dive too much into the specific projects. But, where are you from originally? And I don't know, in those early beginnings, was there any connection to conservation or wildlife or nature? Tell us a little bit about where you grew up.
I was born in New Zealand, and I grew up in Wainuiomata, in the suburb of Wellington, and spent most of my years in Wellington. And as children, we used to go camping with our family around New Zealand, but didn't really have a huge nature or conservation interest. And that really came later on in life, I think. Yeah, I left school when I was 15 and got into a role in industry, and then left that after about 15 years and started my own business and was quite a successful entrepreneur in the home brewing space. So we were making equipment to sell beer and wine making supplies and spirit making supplies around the world. And between those two roles, I took some time out. I spent 6 months overseas, and one of the things I did was did a Kentucky tour around Europe, and I met up with a couple from South Africa, and they were my first connection to South Africa. And I'd fallen in love with South Africa reading Wilbur Smith books as a teenager, and being a rugby enthusiast from New Zealand. South Africa was always the ultimate enemy. So fantastic connections with rugby, and then meeting up with Chill and Shill, my lifelong friends from there. We ultimately came over to visit them, and they took us to Shishlu Umfolozi. They had a place on Kubieni, and then into Kruger, and that's where I started falling in love with the wildlife of animals of Africa even more. So I still remember the first day I saw a rhino. It's just something it's something prehistoric. It's something so incredible. It's just hard to even possibly explain the experience, but I still remember the day coming around and finding them. So then I got into conservation really through when the poaching started. And the 1 year we came to visit, and my kids and my ex-wife all fell in love with Africa too through the eyes of the hedges. They were telling us about this rhino poaching, and it was happening in Umfolozi. And Umfolozi was kind of like my spiritual home by then. And Peter Camp and Umfolozi is a very special place. And to think that people were coming in and killing rhino we couldn't get a head around it to start with, but then to work out that it was for a horn that really didn't do anything, I found it very confronting, and I got very angry about it. And the business we'd started off as a small business. We started off with one home brew shop in 1989, and by the time, now we're talking about 2007, the business had grown quite a lot. We expanded into America, Australia, and the UK. So, well, how can I do something about it? And you know yourself in Africa, it's incredibly hard from outside when you're looking in to try and find something that you can trust, that you can put your money into, and that the money will be spent well. So I'd luckily enough been over there many times and was getting a feel for the landscape. And my goddaughters, because I became the godparent to all the children from the Hedges family, and my goddaughter's boyfriend, I was chatting to him one night over a beer, and I said, Grant, his name's Grant Telfer. I said, Grant, how could you do something to help in this poaching crisis? And he said, well, I've just been with Lawrence Munro, who was a section ranger from Umfolozi, and he's telling me how they get no support from the government, but now his men are being shot at, and they're still in khaki uniforms. So we worked out that we could buy uniforms for all of his rangers, camouflage uniforms, and we got their sizes, had them made, and then gave them through the Honorary Rangers Association to the rangers that needed them. So there's no one's getting upset because there's no flow of money through the Parks Board, or it's all got a proper pathway to get in there. And my friend Chill from that original, he's a lawyer, so he handled all the finances for me. So I would just send the money to his account, and then he would pay the bills. And it was just such a wonderful way. For me, it was like we were buying wholesale and giving it to the people that needed it. No middleman. It was just such a wonderful connection. And I got on really well. I had a great relationship with Lawrence, and as things grew, we started investing in bigger projects. And ultimately, he went into Project RHINO, and then my funding went across with him to Project RHINO, and we started working through some of the projects there. One was Zapwing. When that started up, we were a big supporter. We paid Etienne's salary. I'm not sure if you know Etienne.
No, I don't.
Yeah, paid Etienne's salary for a number of years, and then when RHINO Art started, we were the first funders. When Kingsley came down out of the Lobombo Mountains with this crazy idea of taking the art project around the schools, we were the ones that I was chatting to him, and I said, what do you want to do with it now? He said, I want to take it to all the schools in Africa. I said, what's holding you up? He said, money. I said, how much money would you need? And he said, well, 150,000 Rand. And we'd just finished a rally where we'd raised $130,000 US. So I said, hey, Kingsley, I'm going to make sure you get that money. Now what's holding you up? And he said, okay. The next time I saw him 6 months later, he's going, geez, Pete, you gave me a whole lot of work there. Thanks very much. But yeah, it's been fantastic, but I think that's one of the skills I bring to conservation is that I can see a good idea quickly and I like to move quickly and make things happen. So, and I don't like to be in there for the long term, but if it's a good idea, I can be the catalyst to help it start. And then they need to find funding from other sources going forward. But Project RHINO, we've worked with consistently for a long time. So I think you guys were feeding. I think you were feeding were you and Matt feeding the rangers with Rowan Ferreira from the Spa and Hoodspray?
Yeah, that was during lockdown when they had to cut back a bit on funds and stuff to pay the rangers. I think it was overtime is what they cut back on, but just to support them and their families through that time, we worked with them to get some more food packages out to the families. And I think we did that for 6 months. So like that first 6 months of COVID, which was a pretty amazing experience.
Did you meet the RHINO art crew that they came up and did some at one stage too with Nkombi RHINO and Rowan from the Spa? I'm not sure if you were.
I think I met, is it Willem from Nkombi?
Willem,
yeah. They helped. We put a group through a ranger selection. It was the first ranger selection and training during COVID, and I think they helped sponsor some of the uniforms or some of the clothes there. So yeah, I got to meet him as well. But yeah, so many people doing really great work in that area.
Yeah. Well, we were also Project RHINO switched onto feeding around the country as well, and they did a stint up there as well. So we were working in with. We'd sponsored the truck for Project RHINO, which was now turned into feeding a wagon driving around, dropping off the porridge. The other thing we were supporting the food packs through Rowan at the Spa that they were giving out. So kind of a common. You from America and us from New Zealand trying to help out in such a desperate situation. It's a chronic time. Yeah. It was such a terrible time.
How long was it between when you first came to South Africa and when you learned about the rhino poaching and started doing work there?
I first came to South Africa in 1982 as part of my big trip, and then started doing the work in 2007. So it was quite a big gap.
So you'd gone back and forth, though, quite a few times and spent some time there?
Yeah, so my business was based in New Zealand, but we did a lot of travel through to Europe. I could bring South Africa into visits on the way backwards and forwards. Plus, I took over all the sales support work in South Africa, so I got more excuses to come here. Lots of reasons to come.
Yeah. I mean, what was that experience like when you learned about the poaching? You said it kind of, for you, it was like unexpected almost. I mean, what was that process of taking that in and then trying to figure out something to do?
Because I was looking at it from a first world perspective, it was very confronting to find that someone could come into your national park and kill your iconic animals and get away with it. So that's the first thing that really broke my heart. I knew things were problematic in South Africa, but that's kind of something to really get your head around. And often when we talk to people about rhino poaching, they're looking at it from that same perspective, thinking, well, it's wrong, it should be stopped. So that was hard. And then secondly, an animal it's been around for millions of years and it virtually hasn't evolved in all that time. It's virtually the same animal, but like crocodiles, they're already perfect. They don't really have a natural enemy. They don't cause any trouble in the environment. Crocodiles do, but rhino don't. White rhino, very much like cows, just munching grass, and they play a vital role in the ecosystem of clearing out bushes and allowing the antelope in behind them. So it's just kind of, not only was it so fundamentally wrong on a legal point of view, it was fundamentally wrong on an environmental point of view that someone would want to do this, and on an ethical point of view for just destroying something that's been around for so long. They've been around way longer than humans have been around. All those things were really, I found it really difficult to deal with, but I definitely wanted to do something about it.
Were you ever confronted with poached rhino early on? What was that experience like for you?
It's horrendous because they're always a lot bigger when you're up close and personal with them. And when they're full of maggots and they've been, slaughtered, the stench, the horror of it is magnified so many times. It's gut-wrenching. Amazing people like Dave Cooper, for instance, who's probably one of the vets in South Africa that's borne the brunt of more autopsies than anyone else, I'm sure, must suffer so badly seeing this every day. They start out their career, for instance, wanting to help animals, and nowadays they're doing mostly autopsies on magnificent animals. So yeah, it takes a toll. Even for me, just seeing it one time, I can't imagine what it's like on day to day with the people that have to deal with it.
Yeah, especially, between the rangers and the wildlife vets and all the folks that have that firsthand experience. I've only been confronted with one poached rhino, and that one, they didn't get the horn. It was a bad shot and it staggered off. So they weren't even sure it was poached at first. But still, by the time I saw it, the smell is just so overpowering. It's pretty, like you said, confronting is a good word, experience. And I think we can maybe dive into some of those other projects that you've worked with. But over time, working on all these different things to help with the poaching crisis, how did your perceptions change about the problem? Because I think, a lot of people coming from the outside in, and I guess I really didn't have much of a concept when I started working on this film, other than the film was already started. So I had the context of some of the footage, and then Matt was from South Africa, so could kind of explain some of it in that way. But I think coming in from the outside, you don't realize how complex the situation is. And sometimes people think it's very, black and white. There's bad guys, good guys, what's going on. But I'm curious for you how that changed over time and what your initial thoughts and feelings around it were and how that evolved.
Yeah, it starts out very black and white. It's wrong, it should be stopped. That's the end of story, And that's very much the white first world, especially predominantly male view would be. But when you start deep diving into it, the reason why the poaching is there is, there's so much socio-economic factors involved. There's a lawlessness in Africa, and particularly in South Africa, that enables it. There's corruption that drives it. There's, even at the other end, in the Asian side, there's misconceptions and a lack of empathy, and there's all sorts of factors going and layering across it. It took my initial work was more around, we were working with paying rewards for information. We were helping dehorn rhino. We were doing all of the stuff that is the frontline stuff. And I guess over time, especially getting involved with Project RHINO, and there was a departure for me from moving away from preventative or from that type of military response to more of a, how are we going to change this long term, because this problem is not a 1 year or a 2 year. I also thought in the first that we'd just nip it in the bud. We'd knock it on the head. We'd raised some significant funds. We did social rallies through Africa. We're bringing people in from, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, and America, and the UK, and we raised $130,000 and we thought, this is going to be great. We're going to stop this problem. We went back the next year, and then especially some of our Chinese suppliers were saying, "But haven't you fixed it yet?" So yeah, but then I guess that's where we end up with Koru Camp ultimately, because education, there's the two projects we have, they're both RHINO related, because one is education and Koru Camp, and allowing the disadvantaged community members to come in and actually experience the bush and develop a love for the animals that they no longer have because they're so disenfranchised from it. And the other project in the Eastern Cape is that the land that we've purchased and donated as a pilot project will ultimately house rhino in the future, because the idea is to connect Arrow and Great Fish River with a corridor, and that could become as big as Kruger, the Greater Kruger National Park in the future. And one of the big problems we have now is we actually don't have enough room for rhino, because so many people have divested themselves, so many private owners have divested themselves of rhino because it's too expensive to keep them. We're now in the ridiculous situation that we could be having to, or we kind of already are, we're now culling an iconic species. We don't do it now, but in reality, we move those rhino into places that aren't safe for them because they have to be moved somewhere, and then they ultimately get poached. So we are already, in a way, doing just that. Yeah. So we need more land. We need to make it worthwhile for the people having the rhino, and we need to then take away the cost of security, which is the huge cost, and also create more land available for them. So amazing projects for rewilding Africa through Grant Folds, another good friend of mine, creating more space that we can put the rhinos into and expanding them through, Pinder being well involved in Great Plains. And these guys are stretching the boundaries by taking rhino back into these places where they were many years ago, and Africa parks and peace parks, providing safe spaces where they weren't before. So those are all parts of the big picture that needs to be done. And we can't keep on just dehorning and shooting every poacher that comes along and run a militaristic response to it. We've got to educate the people and provide safe space for the animals. So it's a big answer for a little question, I guess.
No, it's very similar to the way Global Conservation Corps has evolved over time too. At the beginning, it was very much focused on supporting the rangers with equipment and training, and we still do some ranger support. And this film, Rhino Man, is very much geared towards, highlighting their work and what they do. But, between the nonprofit and even as part of the social impact campaign, it's geared more towards addressing those issues with the youth and community and the engagement of the community with those conservation spaces. So I'd like to dive into that a little bit more with you, in connection to Koru Camp. But how did you decide to go in that direction? And maybe for people that have no concept of South Africa, the social economic situation or anything there, give a little bit of that landscape for people.
Okay, so Koru Camp is inside the Greater Kruger National Park. So the Kruger National Park runs along the eastern boundary of South Africa, from the top of South Africa right down to Eswatini, which used to be Swaziland. And it's fairly narrow, it's long and narrow, but there's a bulge out to the left-hand side of that, and we're in the middle of the area there. So there's no fences between ourselves and Kruger. So we were in this huge biome, and we have any animals that are in that biome could turn up. As I said before, we had wild dog this morning, which is fantastic. And they typically roam 80 to 100 kilometres, or 40 to 80 kilometres in an evening, in a day. So to have them turn up, spend a few minutes there is pretty amazing. So the biome's massive. We're incredibly lucky to be involved in that. But outside of that biome, there's a fence line, and that separates where the communities are and where the conservation area starts. And those communities on the boundaries originally were more than likely pushed out of the park when it was proclaimed back in the early days, and pushed into areas where there's very little water, there's very little chance of even having a subsistence living. It's very, very difficult. So you've got a huge group, and you're not talking about one or two. I mean, in the Acorn Hook area, I think there's millions. There's 2 or 3 million people in that Acorn Hook area, which is between that and Phalaborwa is where we concentrate. And we like to sort of stay around with Hoedspruit as our centre point, and then because the closer we can bring the kids, it's easier and it's more relevant to them that they're the ones that are just behind the fence. So you're talking with people with an unemployment rate of probably 40 or 50%, maybe higher. You're talking about parents who are, if they are working, they're working way away. So the kids are often looked after by their grannies or their googles. And that's another layer. They don't have the father role model because if dad's away working. And then the structure's broken down a fair amount, so a lot of the dads aren't even present once the babies are born anymore. So you've got a lot of societal problems there, a lot of poverty, and they feel very disenfranchised. And apartheid is another layer on top of all that. They were pushed, they were marginalised during apartheid, and when they got control of their country back, they then expected to be able to be equal economically with the white population, but that hasn't happened for many reasons. The government has let them down more and more. Housing's improved in most cases, but as far as opportunities, they haven't come through and given them the opportunities that they promised to give them. So you've got a lot of problems. So for us, it's an education thing to show them that the game reserve, which they often resent, because what goes on behind that fence is for rich white guys. They come in and they drive around on their Land Cruisers and they don't see the jobs and the benefit from that land accruing to them. So that's kind of the landscape that we're living in. And how do we get into getting Koru Camp? I've been interested in education since Rhino Art. We've been working with the Rhino Art for a long, long time. And other education projects. I've got a dear friend, Carla Hazer. She's in KZN. She does wildlife booklets, educational booklets, which go out to schools. We've been sponsoring those for a number of years. We were doing school camps down in KZN for the Lawrence Anthony Earth Trust. And during lockdown, I was back in New Zealand, and a friend of a friend said there's a guy interested in buying a farm inside not far from where I actually have my own lodge. It's 1,000 hectares, and he wants to buy it and wants to partner up with someone who's interested in education, because there's a education aspect to the camp. So I was very interested and ended up buying the property without even seeing it, and arriving over to South Africa and finding ourselves with a 1,000 hectare property on the Olifants River in a beautiful part of, nestled between Baluli and Tasiri. It's an incredible little spot. And the education camp was part of the main camp, and my partner wanted us to run education stuff there as part of a project for the social development project for the camp. I said, it really can't work with us running in the same space, because, our people, we want to provide a space where it's just for them. They have a place that they can be empowered, and that we can spend time educating them, and they can enjoy themselves without having to worry about guests, and they can yahoo at night around the fire. And so we decided to move away from the main camp, and we've taken over what was called Dundee Dam Camp, and now we're calling it Koru Camp. So we're back about 4 kilometres from the main lodge, in a very pristine, very, very quiet area, away from the river, but we do drive to the river every day. And we have a dam nearby, as we spoke about earlier. So then getting the camp was just the first part. Then we had to start working out what we're going to do as far as the camp's concerned. So we've developed great relationships in South Africa over the years, and started making inquiries and putting groups together. And we've got a staff of 3 at the moment, with Daneo, and Joel and Taniko, and they all come through from the community, and they've come through with different levels of help from the different foundations. The Timbavati Foundation's been instrumental in at least 2 of them, and spent time at South African Wild College doing their education through bursaries, and then gone out into the field. And then their passion is educating young people and going back and giving back to the community. So we're providing this project which just makes their dream come true. So they run the camp. I don't get involved in running the camp. We've started up a proper NPC, and we can take 18A certificate donations from South Africa, and we're in the process of being able to take your deductible donations from America, UK, New Zealand and Australia. So that's kind of the side that I bring into it from the business side. So I'm running the business side for everyone as an unpaid employee, because one of my goals is not to get myself a job. I think it remains very pure when we start looking around for fundraising, and I'm not actually taking any salary myself. The only people taking salaries will be the ones that are on the job. But yeah, I've been lucky enough to have quite a bit of help. We've got a beautiful truck, Toyota Dyna game viewing truck that we take the kids around in. The 24 kids fit on the back, and we take them around in that. If the group's smaller, then we'll take the game viewer. So we can take up to 24 people in the camp at a time, and that includes students or Googles, and also educators if they come in.
Can you tell us what it's like for the kids when they come through there? Have you been there for some of those experiences, and just to witness that? Because I feel like, I've spent 9 months in 2020 in South Africa and been there back and forth, and have a sense of, that separation that you're talking about from those conservation spaces. And there's a lot of great work being done to try and change that. But I think it's pretty... I've been on a couple drives with kids that have never been in a reserve before. So just curious what that experience is like from your side, and maybe you can just kind of walk us through how, the kids arriving and what the process might be like, what they go through, and what that's like for you to witness.
Yeah, the very interesting thing about African children is that they often go very, very quiet when they're experiencing something new. So you often see a group coming into camp, and you think that they're completely uninterested, and that they're not, but they're so in awe, and they've got this like deadpan way of behaving. It's like, and that's one of the beauties of Koru Camp, because as you say, you've been on a lot of game viewers. A lot of these kids, it's not that they don't get into the game reserve. If they do get in, they get in on a game drive, often in the middle of the day when the game drive vehicle is not being used for the guests. So it's hot, and they come in and they see the game, and then they go home again. So they do see some of the animals at times, but it's not till the magic of staying overnight in the bush and hearing the sounds and smelling the smells and having the bugs and having the fire and having everything else. The second day is always incredible compared to the first day. The first day, they've often never been in a tent before, so they don't even know what these tents are really. They've seen them, but the only time they see them is workmen on the side of a road or something. It's like, so now they're going to sleep in a tent. They're going to stay overnight in a game reserve where there's wild animals all around, and most of them are petrified of wild animals. They think every animal is going to try and kill them. So it's like everything's going to be coming in the fence to try and take them out and eat them. It's like, and that's a quite typical perception from anyone going into a game reserve. So it's not like that. Obviously, the animals just want to have a good time too. They're not looking to eat people. But the kids, they'll often the second day really open up and then be starting to laugh and carry on. Usually the first night around the fire is probably the first time they start relaxing a bit, and then seeing these animals for the first time. It's just mind-blowing for them. And the different animals that appeal to different people is always amazing. Hippopotamus is always a big favourite for the kids because they never see hippopotamus. If you're going past the fence, you might see animals through the fence, but you won't see a hippo. And they don't have any rivers where they are, so they never see a hippo. Well, of course, all the animals, the elephants and giraffes and things. And the fact that you're on a game drive vehicle where there's a lot of their experiences are from vans, from the Toyota Hilux van, which we call taxis over here. So they're behind windows and they're in a secure environment. But now they're on a game vehicle and the animals can quite easily jump in. So they get the feeling that, they've got to get past that dangerous feeling as well. So, it's wonderful to watch them. And then towards the end of it, they just don't want to go. We have little kids crying, "No, please, can we stay here, please?"
That's incredible. And how many nights is a typical stay for them?
We have a minimum of 2 nights, but we try to encourage 3 nights. So the way we run our camps too is interesting. We were going to go into the community and then find people to bring into the camps, and that was the original plan. But when we went and talked to the NGOs that are already working in just the Hoodspruit area, we found 10 NGOs working in the community, interacting with schools or with different groups, and they all had the need to bring people into a game reserve, but they didn't have the ability. They don't have it. There's nowhere to bring them. So some of them were able to take kids into, like Classeria would take people in and they'd have a great game drive there, or they could take them into Kruger. But taking them to Kruger, they're up at 5 a.m. and they're back home at 7 or 8 at night. It's a massive day for them. So for what we're offering and the price that we're offering it to them, it fills the gap for them that they want to give their kids but haven't been able to in the past. So we decided to move out of, we do very few camps where we organise directly. We work through the people that are already in the community, and they already have the contacts, and they often have a filtering device to bring a funnel to bring the kids in that most going to benefit from it. Some of them do camps outside, and then the top achievers from those camps or people that show most interest in conservation, then they get to come on our camp. So we have this, be able to provide benefit to the best people. And then over top of that, we want to be able to provide our own program to take the best of those and keep working with them, because one of the other problems with conservation education is that it happens in year 7 and 8 or 6 and 7, but it doesn't continue. So once they get older, they don't come back into the game reserve. I think that's, we find people that are really passionate about it when they're 12, 13 years old. And if we can run a program where they prove that they can continue to do studies around that, then they can come back in, and then we could really start making a difference to a large number of kids' lives. Yeah, no, that's super exciting. I'm curious, on top of just the experience of game drives and spending the night at the camp, sitting around the fire, what's the education side like, and what are the facilitators? How are they interacting with the kids? So it's a continuous education process from the minute they arrive in camp, or even when they first get onto the game drive vehicle. But, the first thing we talk about is litter. There's no littering in the camp. Point out what a beautiful environment it is with no litter. And then we talk to them about, where litter comes from and how they can reduce litter by not buying. Joel does the talk on the 5 R's: reuse, recycle, refuse, all of those. So they get a lesson about that, and that usually happens spontaneously. I was on the truck one day and we saw a plastic bottle floating down the Oliphants River, and Joel stopped the truck and said, "Look at that, what's that?" And they go, "A plastic bottle." You know where it's going to go? It's going to go all the way out through Mozambique into the Indian Ocean. It's going to float around the Indian Ocean for 2,000 years. It's an incredible thing for them to get their head around. And then he does the 5 R's talk. So That's part of education that's woven into all the storytelling. But inside the camp, we do some team building exercises, confidence exercises with each other, meditation, trying to teach them to find stillness in a crazy environment. Because a lot of these people, we had one young lad come and asked him what he thought of it, and he said, it's really quiet, but it's really noisy. For him, he's used to dogs barking, chickens. He's used to hearing the shebeen, music going in the shebeen all night. So now he's got none of that, but he's got all the noises from the bush. So he's processing this whole change. So, things that we're able to give them some time to teach them to meditate, so even in the craziest environment, they can find some peace for themselves, and we empower them. We treat them as if they're 5-star guests to we just had a VIP at Visit Camp the other day, and I said to Joel, make sure you give them a VIP treatment. And Joel came back and said, how does that differ from what we do to everyone that visits our camp already? I said, fair point. Make sure he gets his own tent, that's all. It's the only change we could make.
That's so great.
So, these kids, they come in and they're treated with respect, and they respond to it. And Joel is firm with them too. There's no mucking around. He's right on to them and Danae if they're misbehaving. But the kids are so appreciative of the opportunity. It's just something else, We had, and when we bring the googles in, that's even more fascinating. We had sat around the fire with the googles one night. No, I can't speak any Shangaan, and they were speaking in Shangaan, so everything had to be translated. But they asked one granny, first, how many grandchildren and offspring does she have? It was 45. So it's 45 people that she has in her sphere. Wow. And we said, she was 82. And we said, can you tell us what your best thing in the camp was? And she said, well, I've got one good thing and one bad thing. She said, I'm 82 years old, and this has been the best weekend of my life. And why must I wait till 82 before I can come in and understand what this is about? Her son and her grandson, her son worked in the game reserve all his life, and the grandson is still working in the game reserve, and she'd never been inside one. So that's how disenfranchised the black people are in the community. From, if it was a white game ranger, he would have bed nights for his parents, and they would be coming in and they'd be sharing the journey with him, but it's not the case for the community guys.
That's an extremely powerful moment there. And even working with a lot of the rangers, it's a similar story. A lot of them haven't been able to bring family into the reserves. And I think that's starting to change. But it's just it's kind of heartbreaking, actually. Just to think about that. Yeah. It's that just in just recent years, this is starting to change. But it sounds like such a wonderful experience.
Yeah. And in that regard too, we're open to bringing anyone from the community in, whatever the group is. So I have a place in the Olifants River Game Reserve, and the staff are allowed to bring their children into camp for 1 month of the year, the month of December. And so we said, well, we'd like to take the Baludi Trust sponsored the kids to come to our camp. So we took 19 of the children that have been coming in year out to the main camp, but they only stay in the block where the staff carry on. They get the occasional game drive, but they came and stayed at our camp for 5 days. So we had APU kids from the APU, kids from the office, the housekeepers, gardeners, the road people. And the joy on their parents' faces when I've come across them since that happened is just unbelievable. You couldn't. If I ever did it for thanks, that would be all the thanks I'd ever need. The reward, seeing how happy that those parents are, their kids have had this opportunity.
Yeah, I can only imagine. A lot of the folks, I know a lot of the APU rangers, they're so passionate about their work and being out in the bush. And, I think a lot of them get a lot of joy about being outside and in that space. So for them to be able to have their children experience it in the way that you're providing is pretty exciting. It makes me think about some of my first nights out in the bush. You talked about how you notice the noises out there, and the night jars are one of those iconic noises you hear at night that you probably don't get to hear very often in the communities. Maybe every once in a while one will land around there, but just being out in that quiet bush and hearing those night jars, it's really special.
Yeah, and you mix in a lion call here and there, or hyena. It's very magical.
What's that like for you, just to see this? And have you gotten any feedback? I know you guys, this is kind of a relatively new project, but what kind of feedback have you been getting from the kids and the parents? And I don't know if they've come back, some of the kids that have been there. How's this affecting people?
It's quite transformational for the children that come on the camp or gurus that come on the camp, anyone that comes into the camp. And we did a survey with the gurus that came in the other day. We ran a grannies and granddaughters camp. So the grannies could come in, they brought a granddaughter. We kind of thought it would be really nice to be able to blend the generations. And the gurus have been largely marginalized within their own family structure as well. So empowering them to be able to, well, you can come with me to the game reserve was quite powerful. But then interviewing them beforehand, the survey that they did before, what do you hope to get out of it? One of them wrote down she wanted to hope she was going to get some bushmeat and some firewood to take home. So the perception is you're going to come to the game reserve and it's going to be something that you can utilize and improve your life as far as feeding your family and cooking. But when she's left, it's like, I never knew any of this existed. I didn't understand, we talked earlier about education. Well, Joel talks constantly about the circle of life and the interaction and how the little ant on the ground is just as important as the big elephant. We talk about the elephant and the dung beetle, how the dung beetle takes the elephant's dung, buries it in a crevice, waits for the rain, and then that creates the tree that the future generations of elephants will be hiding under and eating from. So the elephant needs the dung beetle and the dung beetle needs the elephant, because if there's no elephants, the dung beetle can't get the dung and lay its eggs in it and grow more dung beetles. So everything's intertwined, and you take one away, then the other one's going to suffer. So teaching those lessons, that's not just about the game, that's a big philosophical lesson about life itself. So all these very, very important lessons, they flow right throughout their lives.
Yeah, and I think it's, kind of full circle, even in the story of fighting for the rhinos. Like you said, starting out, you were focused more on frontline workers and helping rangers and funding different projects like dehornings. But, I think a lot of those efforts, we still need them and we need to support them, but they're fighting a losing battle unless something bigger changes. And what you're doing at Koru Camp is really changing the culture and the connection to that space by including people in it and growing them and fostering future conservationists and people that can take ownership of it.
Yeah, we're not only looking for future conservationists or looking for future APU people or providing jobs within the game reserve. What we really would love to have is the future leader of South Africa come through our camp and learn about the love of wildlife and fall in love and understand the need for the wild spaces for carbon sequestration. We also talk about climate change. And this is another subject that they don't have any exposure to in their schooling system. So we talk about you need these trees for the carbon, you need these animals to keep the system going, because this is what purifies our planet. So all those things are vitally important. But another big aspect of what you were talking about there and my change of direction, I guess, was, you've got to be an optimist if you're going to be involved in conservation in this world. It doesn't matter whether you're in Costa Rica, you're in Borneo, or you're in South Africa, or the middle of the Congo. There's pressure everywhere with this screwed up system that we have of utilization of resources, overutilization of resources. And everything has to suffer except humans. Human are the only one that mustn't suffer. Everything else is expendable. And I'm plant-based or vegan, so I have strong ethics around animals as well and their sentient rights. So it's quite a tough space to be with some of the conservationists who are heavily into hunting and utilization of resources within the reserve to, and I get it and I understand that in some situations, if they're going to continue with the paradigm that we have, they've got little choice than to run their property as a hunting reserve. But, I fundamentally have a challenge around, when you see an elephant herd and you see the matriarch in charge and you see the little babies and the teenagers and the interactions and the disciplining and those are sentient beings. And I believe the elephants are more intelligent than we are. They just don't have their fingers and thumbs to be able to do the things that we've done. I don't think we have a bigger brain or a smarter brain than them. They keep knowledge over generations and they don't have any computers or anything to write it down, and that's all in their heads. So, how do we have the right to take out one of the old bulls because we say he's no longer having any purpose in society, how do we get to decide that that bull doesn't have any purpose in society? And on what basis? How do we even know that it doesn't have any purpose in society? That's the font of knowledge in the community. That's, I've said to one person once when they were telling me about culling the elephants because we've got too many, and I'm going, well, we've got too many bloody humans too. And I said, that elephant you're talking about culling, he's about the same age as you. You're not breeding anymore. He's not breeding anymore. So we don't want to kill him because we haven't got enough room because of you. So, we need to be careful about who we start deciding in which society we should be getting rid of, So, yeah, I've dived off into a little...
No, it's one of those topics that's important and has a lot of nuance and subtlety, and I feel like, sadly, it turns into a lot of times screaming match from both sides, like so many things that become politicized or things like that.
Yeah, well, too many polar opposites and not enough talking in the middle, Well, obviously, I talked with some people at a hunting lodge up on the border of Limpopo, and, the guy, I just thought, the last thing I want to do is sit down with a bunch of Americans that have come out to hunt animals in Africa, it's like, ugh. But speaking to the lodge owner, and he was in tears at the end of it, saying, look, I don't want to be doing this, but I live in an area. There's no tourism opportunity for me here. The opportunity for me to make money out of this land that I've inherited from my family is for me to clear it and put citrus in and sell the citrus into Europe. Now, how much worse for the environment is citrus up in that area than having native bush that has animals on it that has a little bit. So I totally get that. It's the paradigm that's wrong, not the. Yeah. If he didn't have to make money out of that land by killing animals, if there's another way to make the money, he would be doing it. So it's not clear cut. It's not them and us. It's different situations for different folks. I'm not justifying the hunting because that's the side of me that. Yeah. But I get it.
Yeah, and it's like all these situations, they're always more complex when you kind of get close to them than from the outside.
Yeah.
You kind of need to be in that situation with that specific individual or place or whatever to really understand where they're coming from sometimes. I think maybe that could kind of lead us into a conversation about some of the other work you've done. You've helped fund, and I'm sure you could talk about it more. I just kind of found out about this as I was doing some research on you, but you've helped promote and fund quite a few films around, some of them either around food and veganism and animals, and some of them kind of more focused on the RHINO situation. STROOP is the one I've seen, which has had a lot of impact on the situation and bringing awareness. So maybe you could talk about how you started getting into this and what your goals are with it.
When you start thinking about education, when you're looking for a solution to get the message out there, it's very, very hard. I can put social media posts up, and I'm terrible on social media. So my few family members might see it and someone might share it, but I'm not good enough to have any impact. But when you have a really good movie about it, like STROOP, and what an impactful movie, that would have reached millions and millions of people by now. For me, as an entrepreneur, it's bang for buck. If I'm going to put in so much money and I can have this much impact from it, I always try and think about what impact am I going to have for my money. So, I don't have unlimited money. I'm lucky enough that I sold my business for a good amount, and I'm able to put money aside and do some of this wonderful work. But it's not unlimited, so I need to make sure that when I do stuff, I get an effect from it. And STROOP would be one of our real winners. And it was a movie that I was deeply involved with. It started off as a crowdfunding, just coming in and I took one of the big packages, which allowed me to go on and be a director for a day or be with the director for a day. And I never got to do that because my traveling schedule never allowed me to be on there. But every time I'd fly through, Sue and Bonnet were near the airport. They'd come and visit me at the airport, or I'd go and visit them. And, there was times when everything went quiet. They went back for their second fundraising and the crowd fundraising, and it wasn't as easy as the first one. And it was supposed to be a 6-month project, and then it dragged out, and then gone quiet, and I couldn't get replies back, so I'm phoning them, and finally they answered me. They go, "Oh, Peter, we don't know what to say. We're stuck." I said, "Why are you stuck? Well, we want to go to Asia, and we haven't got any budget, and we can't go back fundraising. We've tapped everyone." I said, "Well, you haven't come and asked me yet." and I guess they didn't realise that there was more funds available, but we helped them get to Asia to do that whole big segment there. And then, that was their first full-length movie that they'd done together. And I'm often involved in this situation where they now get the movie in the can. It's all fine and dandy, there's a lot of work to go, and there's a lot of money to be spent once that film's in the can, and you're probably going through that yourselves now. There's a whole lot more, and you've got to get the soundtrack done, you've got to get all of the editing done, and you've really got to bring, unless you're really skilled, you've got to bring professionals in for some of that, and they don't work for free. And then you've got to get the film to market, and they wanted to do a big, so we came back in, and myself and a few other significant funders, I think Oak Foundation might have been one of them, or Ruford, and helped them get it to market. And then they needed to go, and they wanted to do the film festival, which was, because of the nature of the film, they didn't want to show it in Africa to start with, in South Africa, because they were worried it was going to get squashed, they were going to get arrested, because they were, poking things at the current Prime Minister. So they wanted to launch it overseas, so they got invited to San Francisco, but now they need money. And they, two girls from South Africa who've spent all of their finances, probably all of their family's finances, everyone's chipped in as much as they can. There's nothing left in the tank for these girls to go, and they can't stay in tents in the park. So San Fran, they've got to get hotels, and then they went to Rotterdam, and then I think Berlin. So, all these are not cheap places to stay, so they needed to be able to get out and do that. So they need more funding for that. So, but the wonderful part of the journey was being with them on the way through and saying, girls, you can't give this up. This is a really vital movie to come out there. And then to see at the end of the day, they got it through, they got it across the line, and it's been hugely impactful. I think one of my most satisfying moments was watching it on Qantas on the way home one day from a trip from New Zealand, when you've got a movie onto the Qantas screen. I thought that was pretty powerful. So, I think movies are an incredible way. It's become a lot harder. You're probably finding that now too, to get distribution. Netflix only wants to take their own stuff now, and they're kind of controlling things, so it's making it incredibly hard for independents. We just had Milked, which is the big expose in the milk industry in New Zealand. And, that was a tough one. Puts myself up against some of my friends and family in New Zealand in the milk industry. And everyone in New Zealand knows a farmer, and some of my farming friends don't talk to me anymore. We exposed that, but they couldn't get that onto even national TV because of the influence of the dairy industry in New Zealand. So they ultimately released it for free, and then they've gone down donations, and now they've put it on. They put it onto the Water Bear Network, and so the whole process of getting those films out is really complex. So how do I get into movies? Because they make a big impact, but it's fraught with challenges that filmmakers need a lot of support for when they're going down that track. So if anyone's out there listening to how they might be able to do something to make a difference, I started making a difference when I still had a full-time job, more than a full-time job. I was doing a huge amount of traveling, and I was making small donations. And I stayed in my job because I would have loved to have been out on the front line in South Africa, but I could never make as much money there as I could in the business that I built up. So staying in that business for as long as I can, building up as much money as I can to put into conservation made a lot of sense. But people who can start small, we had a lady the other day that we met on a vegan trip in South Africa here. She said, I don't have a lot of money, but I can make $100 US donation. I said, $100, that's 1,777 Rand. I said, that almost helps us do a day in a camp. It's like the money goes a long way. So viewers can help in supporting films or supporting small projects, and you don't have to be wealthy, or you don't have to be, you can make a difference. And 100,000 people making a difference is a lot easier to deal with than trying to find one person to get that money from.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, you've so eloquently described a lot of the challenges filmmakers go through, which, we're still kind of getting close to the finish line here. But I think it's one of those things where you always think you're maybe 6 months away from pulling it all together, and then there's obstacles you don't realize, or, funding. And I think sometimes it's tough to convince people the value of a film when it comes to impact, just because it's kind of scary. And it's, with any kind of art, you never really know what the end result is going to be or how people are going to receive it. So I think it's a little scary for people to invest in those types of things. But when they do work, it's hard to have that level of impact with anything else, other than a successful film, just in terms of connecting people to people and a story and a topic.
Yeah. I don't know if you had much to do with the girls, but there were 4 different storylines that they were working on, and the last storyline only came together at the terrible tragedy of the Tula Tula orphanage. So The first storyline was along supporting the canine ranger, and then another was about the prostitute shooting the rhino. And, each time I'm talking to them, it's like they're talking about a completely different movie, but it's like, we don't have, as an executive producer, I have no input. So I also have to put my faith in the filmmaker because, there's no input from me at all in how that film could have actually been pro-hunting for all I know, and I could have found myself up, being... they did a beautiful job of being right down the middle on both sides and presenting both sides. And I think that's one of the really special things they achieved out of that movie. But you do put your faith in the filmmaker. And
with documentaries, you don't know what's going to happen. It's for us, our hero, Anton Zimba, who was killed last July from the Timbavati. That was really tragic and unexpected. And then it's, as a filmmaker, you're trying to think, well, do we change the film now? What do we do? And it's been... a lot of tough decisions to make, even just as someone that's, sacrificed a lot of time and their own personal funds. You're just like, I just want to get to the finish line too. So it's hard to make those choices. But ultimately, I think it's really special that you're able to do that in that kind of way and trust in the people that are doing the work. And because I think for the artists, it's, if they really are passionate about it, then they'll find a way through and the best story will come out. So it's a lot of kind of just listening to that voice inside and letting it process and kind of letting that guide you, which, again, goes back to, it's kind of scary for people because it's not structured and this is exactly how things are going to happen and this is exactly what we're going to get. So it's a lot of faith in there too.
I do hope you do tell Anton's story because he's such an incredible character.
Yeah. Did you get to meet him at all?
I never met Anton, but Later's a friend of mine. So it was interesting that on my last trip back to New Zealand, I stopped off at my son's place in Sydney, and his partner says, "Oh, look, I've got my old camera and I'd like to donate that to your friend in Africa, Mike, that does the Wild Shots outreach." I said, he'll be so happy. And she gives me this really nice little Canon camera. And I bring it back and I meet up with Mike and say, "Mike, I've got this camera." He says, he said, "You know what?" He says, "I've just had a guy through, his Anton's son, Jaspith, and he's just done a course and he needs a camera." And he said, "I'm going to give this camera to Anton." So I rang up Later and said, "Later, never guess what's happened. This wonderful connection of my son's partner in New Zealand donating a camera to Jasper so he can continue his photographic journey." So it's such a small world. And that's another way that people can help. People often think there's nothing that they can do to help, but, giving good working laptops and good working cameras that are past their best before date, even if they just want to get themselves a new one and justify buying a new one, give that second one that's only a year or two old, give it to people, projects like ours, and we'll have little kids working on those laptops and learning. And there's so much need for those types of things and there's always someone coming over from some country to Africa that can drop it off. Sometimes it might take 6 months for it to get to its final destination, but it gets there. Things are so desperate in this country that anything like that is so well used, well respected, and well loved.
When we did that selection in 2020, I think that's one of the things I realized is just like there's so many like smart, excited, curious, intelligent, ambitious kids in that area, but it's the lack of opportunities and access to tools is so limited. And I love that story you just told, because when I visited South Africa after Anton was killed and reconnected with his family, and they allowed me to come shoot some more video around their home. And I met Japhet, is his name, the son that you talked about. And he was like checking out my camera and stuff. And I was like, "Oh, are you into cameras?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then he brought out this camera that he had that he was shooting something out of the window of the truck when his brother was driving. He dropped it and it broke. And I was like, "Oh man." I was like, "Yeah, we need to find a way to get you back into shooting." And I reached out to Mike and was like, "Hey, you should see if you can get Japhet into the Wild Shots program." And his camera broke, and so it's yeah, you just never know. All the way from New Zealand it came. It's an amazing story.
Isn't it so incestuous in the conservation industry in South Africa? I mean, everyone knows everyone. I just messaging Matt this morning, and Matt says, your name came up this morning. I'm with a friend of yours in Mozambique.
Wow, yeah. It's a small world for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of advice do you give for people that are maybe trying to get into the conservation space or doing some work from the outside, it could be tough to know where to go or how to start or, what to do or who to connect with. What's your advice?
First off, I'd say come and visit to understand what it is here. It's very, very hard to get in, to find a job, a paying job to work in conservation in Africa, because it's very extremely difficult to get work permits, and we're trying to work with the local people getting the jobs. So if you can come here and volunteer time, that's fine. But if you're coming over here looking for a paying job, it's going to be problematic. But why not think about helping in other ways? Come over and find a project and attach yourself to it and use part of your existing salary to fund it, and then vicariously keep your hand in conservation. That's what's desperately needed here, is more people to take an interest in. And there's quite a few organizations, and we'll probably do it ourselves in the future, like you're taking $10 a month regular subscription to help them establish. There's Nourish on the Orpin Road. They're looking for, I think, 10,000 people to do 10 Rand a month or 100 Rand a month or something, small donations, but that's what they want to fund their organisation through. And I hope Sarah gets it, because that's ways that people can really help in a fundamental way. I get approached all the time by people wanting to come over and volunteer. It's very, very hard to find a placement unless you're really serious about volunteering and you want to be here. You're not just here for the glory. You're not just here for seeing the animals on a game drive vehicle. You actually want to get in and get your hands dirty and give up your freedoms and your time. If you want to work in a rhino orphanage, you have to be prepared to spend 6 months of your life 24/7 with that rhino. They don't want to imprint many people on that rhino. They just want the least number of people as it's being brought through. So you're going to give up your whole life for 3 to 6 months to help a baby rhino. So you've got to be all in if you want to come and do that type of stuff. There are roles for people who've got a militaristic background and coming and helping train in the APU area. There's not a lot of roles for people. There's quite a few volunteer tourism places, which, be careful, some of them are just another front for making money. Others are doing some really valuable work. So that's a way to come in. So you pay to stay, £1,000 a week to come and volunteer somewhere, and it helps run the operation. And you get in and you have a bit of a game experience, and you do some work that can be very meaningful to not meaningful at all. So depending on the place you're volunteering for.
Yeah, be careful.
Lots of traps here, there's a lot of people wanting to take your money all the time, so you've got to be very, very aware of that.
That's some really good advice. And yeah, I think it's just trying to figure out how you can maybe even use your own skills. For me, I didn't even think about it as volunteering for conservation originally, but I just was attracted to this story as a filmmaker, and it kind of brought me into this world. And now, I'm doing a podcast and a film and trying to help out in other ways. So it kind of just takes over your life if you let it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the podcasts that you do, are you giving voices to the caliber of the people you're giving voices to is really inspiring, because a lot of these people, they don't have anything much in the way of their social media. They're not telling their own story because they're too busy doing it. And, you're talking to real heroes in conservation that are making a huge difference. So the work that you're doing in that space, telling their stories and letting them be able to share it with so many people, and the feel-good factor that you give to those people, people with their head in the trenches all the time, they're suffering. A lot of these people, you can hear it in some of their voices. You can listen to the podcast and you can hear the depression. This is what is that movie? I think it's in one of the other films we did about the pangolin, The Eye of the Pangolin. I can't remember the guy's name, but he speaks about, you have to be an optimist to be involved in conservation, because otherwise you'd kill yourself. This is a desperate situation. When Anton, I didn't know Anton, but I knew of him and I should have met him. I just hadn't been in the landscape long enough. Many people had said we had to get together, and, he would have loved the Koru Camp and all that stuff. It's just devastating when someone like that gets taken, and the way he got taken, it leaves a scar on everyone in the landscape. It's not just the people who are up close and personal, but some of the people you're talking to are in the trenches with them. And one of you asked earlier about my movement through this conservation landscape. Part of the reason of getting into education and then getting into regeneration is that, one, the regeneration project is about making a better earth and doing something that's substantial, because if this project ultimately happens, when this project ultimately happens in 50 to 100 years' time, I don't know how long it's going to take, you're going to be able to see this from space. It's huge. The regeneration that's going to take place has got the potential to change our carbon footprint on the Earth. So it's a massive program with 300 to 400,000 hectares of degraded farmland that will go back into native bush and have animals back on it. I mean, it's a mammoth thing, you know. So that's that project, and then the education project. For me, they're like uplifting projects. So when you're spending a lot of time always having bad news, always, you know, like when the orphanage was attacked, you know, we'd raised a lot of funds to help that establish that orphanage. That was one of our projects. And then, you know, we know them. I know Axel personally. I know the people there, you know, Francois and Karen. They're all friends of mine. And the devastation of all that is just, it weighs on you. Even if I'm not even there on a day-to-day basis, you know, when I pick up my phone in the morning, I've got messages say we've just been hit. It's like, you know, you're in tears on the other side of the earth. And, you know, we scrambling to try and do something to help, you know. Yeah,
it can definitely be tough to keep that hope and that optimism in the face of some of these things, and you know, we need that. And I think seeing the experience of the kids going off on these game drives is one of those things that probably brings a lot of hope. And it's interesting. I just actually talked to Axel yesterday, and we're planning on doing a podcast episode, I think, in the coming month. And we're featuring a bit of that story in our film as well. We were there before the attack and have some beautiful scenes of him with some of those rhinos. Yeah, he's an amazing person, and that happened before I got connected to the film. But it's, you know, every time someone hears about it for the first time, it's heartbreaking. And I don't know. I mean, maybe you could talk a bit about how being so involved in conservation for so many years now has changed you as a person.
Yeah, it's been a huge evolution for me personally. You know, I was a meat eater of note, extremely unhealthy and very intolerant of other people, I would say. Very focused on growing my business, and so, you know, even going plant-based is a part of the journey of coming into this space. It's part of, you know, why are you saving animals, is the importance of animals. And then when you start recognizing them as sentient, then you move on. You know, the ultimate, if you really go down to the end of it, is, can you still eat? I know it's a sheep and a cow, and it's not a rhino or an elephant, but, you know, sheep and cows also have families, and they, you know, they're so. When I found out you didn't need to eat meat to live, I could be a lot more environmentally friendly if I didn't eat meat. Then it was a no-brainer for me to change. So the change that I've gone through has been largely inspired by my conservation, and being a very, you know, once my business partner's wife once said, you know, why are you selling so much product in plastic bottles? I says, it's not my job to save the world. It's my job to provide employment for all these people and all the people that supply us. You're a tree hugger, you go save the world. I'm so horrified now that was my attitude, but that would be typical of most businessmen in the world. And I was challenged one day at work by our technical manager, Annabelle, and she says, you're doing all this work saving the world in Africa, but why don't you do something to save the world here? I said, well, what could we do? I said, I don't understand what you think I should be doing. She says, well, I don't know. She says, well, we should do something. I said, well, you tell me what to do. And so how are you going to work that out? So she said, well, can I have some time with some people and I'll get a group of people together and we'll talk about it. So I said, okay. And they came back a month later, and she said, well, we've had to think about what we could do, and we've decided that the first thing we should do in our company is to look in our rubbish bins and see what we're throwing away and try and stop throwing stuff away. I thought that's a pretty logical move, very simple. It's something that we can all be happy with. You know, what we found in those rubbish tins and what had unfolded, we found we were throwing 6 ton, 6,000 kilos, which is about 14,000 pounds of cardboard cartons away every month. And we were buying product from the UK, we were shipping them to New Zealand, and then we were breaking putting those into packages for sale, putting them into other cartons, and then shipping these out to retailers who would then throw those cartons away. And we realized that if we just changed the original size of the carton, because I said to start with, I said, but we reuse those cartons. She says, oh, how long is it since you've been down there, Pete? When we used to reuse the cartons when you were in the warehouse, there was like 10 a week. There's thousands now, and they just get thrown away. So we changed the size of the carton in the UK, and then we reused that same carton, and we saved 6,000 cartons a month. Not only did we stop that going into waste, we also made more money, because we didn't have to buy extra cartons. It's like, Jesus, why wasn't I thinking about this before? It's actually saved you money. Everything we did, the staff would come up and say, Peter, can we get rid of this plastic bag because we don't need it? And I'd go back to the Chinese and say, we don't need that plastic bag. And they say, no, if we don't put it in a plastic bag, it'll get scratched and then you'll complain. I say, it doesn't matter. This is an internal part. It doesn't matter if it gets scratched. So they say, then you must sign an indemnity form for us so that you won't claim on scratch product. And then they'll take the plastic bag away. So now I do that. So now can I have it cheaper because you're not putting it in a plastic bag and it's quicker. So it's like everything that we did for like a year, we saved a huge amount of money. So having that different attitude, that was quite a pivotal moment in making me assess things. And then we made some changes that we thought were good for the planet. So we took palm oil out of one of our products because palm oil is such a bad thing for the orangutans and everything else. But what we put into it was coconut oil. And when you think about coconut oil, that's an even worse environmental disaster than palm oil. So we did the wrong thing for the right reason. So, that's another lesson that you've got to really make sure you work through those things. So the journey had lots of these little lessons along the way, and then the vegan thing. And then when I gave up work, I decided that we'll get into this on a more full-time scale. And another good part of the story was that after we started doing the work in KZN with the Rangers uniforms and things, we had the team at my company, which we were about 75 strong then, we were out having a few drinks on Christmas Eve, and they said, why don't we do something from the company rather than just you going and doing this stuff in Africa? Why don't we do something from the company? And as a company, we'll raise funds. So we'd started a trust called the I Make a Difference Trust, and our company was called Imake. We were making different things, so we're taking a piss take on Apple. But then I Make a Difference Trust, and then we started running these foot rally where we put people out of their comfort zone into 4x4 vehicles with rooftop tents and take them for a 17-day, 16-night extravaganza through Botswana and Namibia and Zimbabwe. And wow, that was a huge success. People would come on, they would pay the cost that it would cost to hire, and they'd do their own food, and it was fully almost self-catering, the whole thing. And then they would pay anything from $1,500 US to $2,500 US per person donation. That's a pure donation just to go to the cause. And the holiday still for these people was like so cheap. For a trip in Africa, I think the tour would cost $3,000 US and the donation would be $1,500. So $4,500 for 17 days in Africa, visiting projects that you wouldn't get a chance to go and visit if you were a tourist, because we have fundraising for these projects. We got access to places that they wouldn't get to otherwise. So that was a wonderful way to link my business world with fundraising. So we had a lot of contacts. We were buying out of China. We had a lot of Chinese people supporting us and doing outreach in China within the industry in China, where they didn't even know what a RHINO was when I first arrived at one of the companies there. So there is all sorts of ways that you can help, and the journey is what you make it.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it sounds like this journey has kind of completely transformed your life in so many ways for the better. And I really appreciate you sharing all this time with me. I don't know, maybe as a last question, why do you keep doing this every day? In the face of a lot of these challenges that we talked about, what keeps you going? What do you wake up and get excited about in the morning?
Well, this morning was seeing the kids watching the wild dog on a video from Joel. I'm living a life of purpose. And if you've got purpose in your life, then you don't need anything else. Just get a buzz every day from the little wins. There's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of struggle, but we're doing great work. And the team are all on the same page. We've just got this magic thing happening, really. Why wouldn't you?
It's incredible. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Peter. I mean, I really appreciate you taking all this time, and I feel like we just kind of scratched the surface of the things that you've been involved with over the years, but really excited to hopefully get to visit Koru Camp one of these days when I'm back in South Africa. It sounds like an amazing place, and I'm excited to see those kids' smiles.
Yeah, we're going to get Matt in, and he's coming in the second week of February to come have a look at the camp and hopefully bring some of your rangers in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of great crossover with future rangers and what you guys are doing.
Well, thanks for having me on your program. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for creating this space for people to tell their stories in Africa.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the RHINO Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're excited to see the film succeed, please subscribe and review our podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at RHINO Man the Movie. More details about RHINO Man, the social impact campaign, and future screenings are at rhinomanthemovie.org. To learn more about the Global Conservation Corps and their work, visit globalconservationcorps.org. Sign up for the newsletter and follow GCC on all of the social platforms. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe and catch up on GCC's Voices of Nature podcast, where Bob Ludke interviews a wide range of people who've dedicated their lives to making a difference in conservation. A special thanks goes out to Simone Wilson for the music for this podcast. He's the brilliant composer for RHINO Man the Movie. Learn more about his work at simonewilsonmusic.com. Until next time, I'm John Jerko, and this is the RHINO Man Podcast.